All right, Chris.
Drew.
What's your favorite candy?
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the deserts here in Arizona. We are gonna be riding two awesome new Pivot trail bikes today. Let's go for a ride and learn all about them. A fun, playful, aggressive trail machine. But wow, I can't believe how well such small travel eats that up.
So how many Twinkies have you shoved in here? If you don't know, I'm gonna find out.
We better find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Work on that. That definitely needs to be tested.
All right, everyone. So come along today as we ride the new Trailcat LT and the Trailcat SL, a bike that shares front and rear triangles, however, with a little bit of different kinematics, shock stroke length, and links. Pivot is able to create a 135/150 LT model and a 120/140 SL model. So let's dive into the details and more importantly, talk about how it rides.
Good. Fancy meeting you here.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. I'm out of shape. All right, whop.
Couldn't you just solve a lot of that by running external cable routing?
External cable routing and zip ties are awesome. We wish we could go back to those wonderful days.
That's me. And my steed.
So some of the inspiration for the bike came from obviously the Trail 429's success, and Pivot was offering the Trail 429 Enduro build option, and essentially all that was an up-forked Trail 429. And then similarly, there was a lot of interest from their own staff, employees, and then feedback from, you know, bike shops and salesmen that were calling them, wanting to know about possibly mulleting certain models of bikes to put a 29er on, like the Mach 6 perhaps, or the Shadowcat back before those were actual options. Chris in particular is a big fan of not just kind of like modifying stuff. He really likes things to be dialed, precisely engineered and designed to work around the wheels that the bike was designed for, to not have too many negative drawbacks. So after seeing that the 429 Enduro build actually made up for about 50% of their sales, when they really only thought it might be like a one-time limited run thing they would do for like 3-4 months, it ended up really taking off. And that was kind of one of the catalysts for reinvigorating the bike and coming out with the Trailcat SL and LT options. So again, the bikes share front and rear triangles. However, the linkage is different, shock stroke is different, so as well as the kinematics, to kind of ideally deliver a pretty similar ride, just with 15 millimeters different travel. So yeah, the complete frames are weighing about 5.3 pounds, with the completes being 28.75 and 27.75 pounds for the 120 versus the SL versus the LT. Most of that has to do with obviously a little bit longer stroke shocks, a minuscule amount of weight, the fork, and then probably some other minor spec differences. The link also adds up to a little bit of weight as well.
How was the first climb?
Oh, it's a breeze. That's what they call it, the desert breeze. Smooth.
We'll be chatting a little bit with Chris Cocalis, the founder and CEO, talking to him about some of the details of the new Trailcat bike series and what their goals were with this new bike. I kind of briefly talked a little bit about the goals, right? And how some of it came from your own employees and sales folks, and the Trail 429 Enduro quickly taking up 50% of your sales in that category, right? So when you set out to design this bike, what were some key things that you wanted to make sure were part of this Trailcat?
Well, it's hard to talk about the Trailcat without talking about the Shuttle SL.
Okay.
That
this is really the analog version of that bike. And that bike was a bike that I spent a lot of time developing, and there was some period of time where we couldn't get our first motors and batteries in. So I spent about 6 months riding that as an analog bike, and it quickly became my favorite analog bike. So when it came a time to look at the replacement of the Trail 429 Enduro, that's kind of what I wanted the replacement for it to be, and that's where we started with. It's got a little bit more travel than what the Shuttle SL has, but basic geometry and the idea of how the bike pedals and feels all derived from that bike.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And the differentiators between the LT and the SL, not the Shuttle SL, but the Trailcat SL, how big are those differences other than 15 millimeters of travel at the back end?
Yeah, they were designed as two completely different bikes, and they feel like two completely different bikes. When we took the Trail 429, the Trail 429 Enduro, that bike was, people were asking if they could put a longer travel fork on the bike, and it's essentially what it was. And we put a Float X on it because it was a little bit more supple and made it more enduro, but really it was all about the 10 millimeter longer travel 36 fork on the front of that. But with this bike, it's basically a whole longer travel chassis that still needs to pedal like that Trail 429 category. The SL, however, that was our 120 millimeter trail bike, or is our 120 millimeter trail bike. And we did not want to give up what was awesome about the Trail 429, that it would pedal snappy and felt like it had more travel than it actually did. And we wanted to kind of build on that. So slight kinematic changes, but a lot done on the SL with the new float shock. A lot of tuning time on that to make sure that we got that snappy feel, but also that shock was more capable than the old DPS of achieving a more bottomless feel out of it.
So we won't go too deep into all the details. There's really extensive videos that Pivot has made on our site, theloamwolf.com. You can see the full press release as well as more in-depth tech features. And I'm sure most all of you out there know how to read a geometry chart and graph. So we won't go too into the weeds on that. We'll touch a little bit on some of the key numbers. There's a high-low feature right here on the bike, which will allow you to put the bike in two different settings depending on your terrain and personal desires for how you want a bike to feel. It comes with a 150 fork on the LT. It is rated to go up to a 160, but essentially the goal was to keep this bike feeling maximized and neutral in that 150 zone. Bottom bracket drop, reach, stack, seat tube angle, all those numbers were kind of designed to work with that 150. And the same goes for the SL and that 140 fork. So here's a look at the graph with all those geo numbers. We just got back from our first ride and we'll cut to some of the POV. We actually, in typical Pivot fashion, Chris and the crew here like to put the riders out on the bikes before we learn too much about the details, which is awesome. It's actually very similar to how we like to test our bikes. We don't really like to get into the weeds on all the numbers and curves and try to put any preconceived notions in our head about what we expect or think we're gonna feel on the bike. So as of right now, I can't really tell you much about it other than it's 120 and 140 millimeters of travel. So what I can say is the geometry to me at 5'11" on the size large felt comfortable. It felt natural for a 120, 140 bike. The suspension platform while pedaling felt really comfortable. There are basically two markers or indicators on that sag marker, and they will give you a little bit different feel depending on what you're looking for. Now, I found the seated climbing comfort to be really, really impressive, especially here in the dry, hard desert, right? You would expect and hope that seated comfort would be something that they're gonna know something about, right? And I think for the more performance-oriented riders, running it at that blue sag indicator line is going to give you a little more sporty and performance feel. I found myself reaching down a couple of times for the lever, mostly to test it out, and being a little bit out of shape here in the middle of winter back home. I just wanted to eke out every little bit of energy I could, and so it was nice to see that there was a pretty notable difference. And then from there, moving into kind of the general trail feel of the suspension, it was really nice, gave a really poppy and playful feel. But then going into some of the faster, chundery bits of rock, the rear shock felt really fluttery, lively, composed when it came time to hit some bigger bumps. I think only one time, maybe two out of the whole ride did I blow the travel indicator ring off the shock. And they were pretty significant hucks to flat off of rock ledges. So it wasn't anything small or minor. So I found myself really not using full travel, but feeling like I was getting a good solid range out of there and never feeling like I was hitting a wall and not getting a good usable amount of travel. And it was really neat combined with the frame, which is pretty stiff laterally. So having a pretty nice compliant rear end out of the suspension, but then when I wanted to kind of slide the back tire into a little catch wall of dirt or something, or really carve into a bank, I could feel the stiffness of the bike give me what I wanted back. Honestly, it was the tires and the really dry, loose dirt that were the limiting factors today out on the trail. The rest of the Geo, like I said, felt really solid, really well balanced for a 120, 140 bike. And I'm very impressed. So again, if you want to get really into the weeds on Geo numbers and all that stuff, check the loamwolf.com. We'll have the write-up with all those bits of information there. But from a pure riding standpoint, very solid, super impressed, and looking forward to share my thoughts on the longer travel version of this bike next. And if you had to pick something other than the ride quality that you're most proud of, or maybe was like the hardest thing to figure out on this bike, what would it be?
How to get two bikes in one. So the whole setup with the flippable shock tabs on the bottom, we basically started with two designs, lay them on top of each other. Obviously pivot points aren't going to match up, even where it mounts to the C-tube isn't going to match up. And we have some wiggle room to rotate things around and keep the exact same kinematics. So could we do that with these two different designs and find some like points and lock down some points and design the kinematics around that? And yeah, finding a combination where we could get both of those. Initially, we had some ideas where it would just be one shock tab and a flip chip, or a much bigger shock tab, and it was just super ugly. And getting it light and getting that operation to work where 180 degrees, it's not a completely different set of shock tabs,
right?
And getting it all super clean in there, that was a cool engineering challenge.
Okay, and I would imagine, like, not that you're necessarily marketing it that way, but as far as like an environmental impact and like cost efficiency standpoint, I mean, being able to not have to have different molds for front and rear triangles for two different models of bike has got to be a pretty nice added benefit, right?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Right on. Well, thanks very much. Appreciate having us out. And,
thank you.
Getting out for a rip. So
it's been great.
So moving into how the bikes felt, for me, at 5'11", I was on a size large for both the SL and the LT. I really enjoyed the way they felt. They were very lively, snappy, light, effortless to move around, right? Part of that is that pretty low weight, I would say. You know, it's not like the full-on XC Lycra race guy weight class, but like it's definitely, it feels very light and lively, and I think a lot of that has to do with the suspension platform and the way these bikes are tuned to handle. The rear end felt really laterally stiff, especially I guess when you lack traction out here, being able to slam it and get it around corners or, you know, catch into little walls of erosion. It was really nice and super fun to play around with. From there, I would say the climbing fit for me was really nice. To be totally honest, you know, I don't spend a ton of time on 120 rear travel bikes, but the ones I have ridden, I usually enjoy. This one did stand out to me a lot as one of the more comfortable suspension platforms, you know, especially out riding here in the Phoenix area. There's a lot of sharp and hard rock, and having a 120 bike that was as capable as that SL was after just one ride. You know, it didn't take a long time for me to get the suspension tune dialed in on that rear shock. That 34 fork is going to take a little more time. I still don't have it dialed, but you know, that's not the bike necessarily. The shock I thought was absolutely awesome. Some of the other media guys found themselves removing volume reducers and really enjoying it. But you know, I'm about 185 to 192 pounds depending on the day, and I thought that it was actually really solid for my weight. Moving into the LT, I actually did remove volume reducers, and after that some of the other editors also started pulling volume reducers out. So there's a 0.4 that is spec'd in here. We went down to a 0.2. Some guys ended up all the way down at 0, which I may try on our long-term test. But overall, I felt that the bike struck a really nice balanced suspension feel and really was good on the fast, fluttery, like chunky bits of terrain, and made for a super fun and poppy and playful feel, and still handled the big hits surprisingly well. Like, there was definitely a lot of stuff where you'd pick up and send it deep or go off of a drop to flat, and you kind of forget that you're on a 135 mil bike. It's really kind of impressive, actually. Like, it definitely rode almost closer into the Switchblade category. And yeah, again, I just had a really fun time on this bike so far. We want to take a quick second and go over some of the frame features found on the Trailcat. Whether you're looking at the SL or the LT, these features will carry over. One of the new features that will probably excite quite a few of you out there is their tool shed. It is their internal storage compartment found here. It is a reversible door, and it's actually one of the easiest to use that we've experienced yet. What's neat is you can basically change the orientation of that lever. Right now it's down at the bottom, so it kind of biases the water bottle cage bosses towards the top. So if you've got a piggyback reservoir shock, it will put the bottle cage up higher. If you undo that, you can flip it so that the lever is here on the top left. Pretty quick and easy. You've got bags that come with the bike, and you will be able to store a whole lot of stuff inside. Easy. These seem quite durable, soft. Pivot told us they went through pretty painstakingly long amount of time to figure out the materials and find something that was durable but wouldn't snag, would stay quiet and hold all the essentials. So this is something that is, again, really, really cool and pretty easy to use. Goes in place quite simply, and it does not require a lot of force to lock or unlock that door. Moving out from there, you get sort of all the standard features you would expect from a Pivot. Frame alignment guarantee being one of them. Pivot has some of the tightest tolerances for their bottom bracket bearings, headset bearings, front to back alignment, and all that stuff is apparent on the trail and when you're working on the bike in the stand. Moving on from there, we've got some updated cable ports. Essentially what Pivot focuses on is user experience from both a quiet standpoint on either side of their new tool shed storage area, are cable clamps or cable guides so that it will hold those cables and keep it nice and quiet. But what's nice is that they've gone away from kind of having multiple ports on either side to just one oversized. So that way, if you're running a wireless dropper, or sorry, a wireless derailleur, which most bikes are coming spec'd with these days, you've got the ability to kind of have one port covered and not have like one hole open and the other needing to be shut. So also they've got quite a lot of sales in Europe and down under, so the ability to run moto brakes on either side and have the bike and the cables flow and look nice is something that they also wanted to put some attention to. Effective January 1, 2024, so long as you register your bike, you will have a lifetime warranty. If you do not register your bike, there's a 3-year warranty. There's also a new bearing replacement policy. Again, all of those details will be on the loamwolf.com, or we can link down to Pivot Cycles, but really cool to have lifetime warranty and bearing replacement programs going into this bike. One of the features that is not new on the Trailcat but carries over is Pivot's commitment to size-specific ride-tuned frame layups, tube shapes, and construction. It's obviously something that contributes to their premium brand price and quality of product. Essentially, each size frame is going to have its own tuned ride characteristics that's going to be more appropriate for riders of that height and weight. So tube diameters change, the layup schedule changes. There's a lot of testing and validation that goes into each size bike so that each rider is going to have a similar experience no matter they weigh 130 pounds or 220 pounds. There are going to be 3 build options. However, with the customization and things that you can add on like live valve, carbon wheels, etc., there's a total of 68 different build configurations, sizes extra small through extra large. There will be a frame only option at $4,099, and then there will be complete bikes starting at $59.99 up to $13,099 for the SL, and $61.99 up to $13,299 for the LT model. There it is, folks, the breakdown on the new Pivot Trailcat series. Hopefully you had fun coming along for a couple of days down in Phoenix. Make sure you stay tuned and subscribe to the channel for lots more fun videos, and let us know if there's anything you want us to focus on for the long-term review, as we're going to be getting one of these bikes, if not both models, for a test.